There's the Meet the President thing going on.
We're happy to see you all here this morning. We'll begin by having a motion to approve the minutes from our June 1 meeting.
I'll move approval of the minutes.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from June 1. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Jason, the manager's report.
Good morning, everybody. I'll start with some good news. We got approved for the EV, the electric vehicle and charging station grant. We just got word of that yesterday. So we'll be moving forward with that. We talked about that. I guess it was June was the last meeting. So that's the good news. The other news, or another topic I'm going to talk about is our snow removal. I know that's been a subject we've talked about quite a bit in the past meetings. I have two routes we're trying to pursue because it's going to snow very soon. So we have reached out to quite a few different companies to get proposals of if they could do the snow removal for us. I got one person that actually gave us a quote, and that was Cache County Public Works. Every construction company I reached out to, they don't have the means to do it. And I think the biggest thing is being held to the FAA standard and just equipment. So every construction company that I reached out to said no. So we have a meeting next week with Cache County Public Works to hopefully fine-tune the proposal that they gave us. We have a 5-year contract proposal from them. It includes purchasing equipment, which might be, because I know we're trying to handle personnel and equipment, so that proposal from them does have purchasing equipment in it and them handling the snow removal. And the other route that we've talked about is us hiring our own personnel at the airport. But I think we're leaning toward going with Cache County. So it is not cheap, but yeah, we're pushing almost $200,000 a year for it. 170, 180. Like I said, we are trying to fine tune some of that. That does include purchasing equipment, a different piece of equipment every year for the next 5 years. So I hope to have some better numbers as far as that goes next meeting. But I believe we're trying to get that soon so we can present that to Logan City and Cache County and trying to figure out ways for funding for that. So that's the route we're hopefully going to take, and that's kind of my report as far as where I'm pushing for that. We have to figure something out. It's going to snow here in the next couple months, and I have no one to help me. Good news, we did find a mechanic that is been good to work with. They've been really responsive and working to keep the machinery that we do have up to date and workable. So that's probably the good news as far as things go. As I feel like our mechanic is on top of things right now. So yeah, I am.
You've been having some interviews. Any success with those?
So the interviews I've been having, yes, I hired 2 guys yesterday, but none of them have a CDL, so they're not qualified to drive the trucks. So they're more my weekend inspection, holiday inspection guys. But as far as CDL workers or people to drive the trucks, I have not had any luck with that. I don't have the budget to hire part-time or full-time people, and I don't have I didn't know which route to take. I don't know if I'm hiring Cache County or if I'm hiring my own people, so I haven't pursued that route of hiring people with CDLs to help with the snow plowing. I didn't want to halfway go down one route if we're going to go the other route. So no, nobody. So the people that I interviewed and hired were not for snow plowing.
So the $200,000 a year you said included equipment, is the equipment owned by the airport?
It will be shared, is kind of the plan.
How does that work if we don't want the county to do it after 5 years? Or we want to go a different route?
That part has not been hashed out yet. I mean, I don't know. That part hasn't been figured out.
And
It was,
what are the 5 pieces of equipment, do you know? That you're going to purchase?
do. So next year is a snow blower, and that would be solely for the airport. The county doesn't really have a need for a snow blower. 24, 25 would be a large truck, a dump truck that would be for plowing, kind of similar to what we have right now. 2025 and 2026 season, it would be a front end loader that a box blade can be hooked to. 26, 27 is also a loader. And then 27, 28 is just written in as equipment replacement costs. So there's not an equipment in that 5th year.
Okay. But we won't own anything except the snow blower?
That, I'll have to try to hash out those details. That part has not been hashed out or figured out with, after the 5 years, who gets the equipment, what. I don't have an answer for that.
And have you done any analysis about, I mean, what it would cost for us to have a person that did that and us buy the equipment? Have you sort of done that sort of
I have.
analysis, parallel analysis?
I've done some analyses on us purchasing equipment and us hiring our own people to do it. And I don't have a spread out, but basically if we were to replace the equipment that we have and hire full-time and part-time people, is about $2.5 million.
A year or over the,
So each employee is about $100,000, but to purchase the equipment, the 5 pieces of equipment, each piece of equipment is about $200,000. And so I haven't broken it out into purchase this one this year, this one next year. But if we were to purchase those same 5 pieces of equipment, 4 pieces of equipment, and hired our own people, it's about $2.5 million.
over the time period? Or in the front?
In the front. The equipment is obviously the big chunk of it. So $2.5 million would include your employees and your equipment. And then next year, if you hired 2 employees, you're $200,000 a year moving forward. So I don't know if that helps. And so we could buy a piece of equipment now and kind of do it how this is broken down in 1 per year. You'd be looking at about, $400 a year, $200 for the equipment and $200 for employees. So that's probably how that would break down, if
Okay,
that helps.
yeah, thank you.
So I don't know how to move forward. like I said, I have a meeting next week with Cache County, and I'll hash that out. I'll talk to them about what a game plan is in 5 years, who gets to keep that equipment, or how we'll move forward with that.
And whether their contract includes maintenance and all of that kind of stuff on the equipment as going forward? I mean,
Yep.
that's fairly critical.
Okay. Okay.
I think, Jason, if it's all right, I think it would be good if, once had that meeting, you discuss some of the potential, send that out to the board so that we can start getting some thoughts and giving you some input on it as well.
Okay.
Whatever we can do to help. Last year, that snow came really close to our wings, as you know the issue there. And that's a little bit concerning. Hopefully we have a good snow season again. You never know, but
Yeah.
we just want to make sure that airport's kept open. And so anything we can be looking at in the meantime to help you in that process, it's a big decision. We gotta get over the mountain with it. We gotta get it done.
I agree.
Yeah. And I've had quite a few meetings outside of this, obviously, with Cache County and other construction companies trying to figure out funding and things. So I think, yeah, we are getting very close to winter, and last winter was my first winter here, and so I don't know what it's typically like, but that's
Plan on that every year.
that's what I'm planning on. That's all I know, and so so yeah, that's what I'm planning on. The last thing I want to talk about real quick, Mayor Daines isn't here, unfortunately, but I received an email from her that talks about trying to review our rates on a more consistent basis, as opposed to every 10 years and doing this big increase in rates that we're kind of facing and talking about right now.
Rental rates you're talking about?
Rental rates and
Tie-down rates?
tie-down rates, and just budget overall, how much Cache County and Logan City are contributing to the airport. So everything combined. And so I think that's something we should talk about in the future. I don't know if we need to dig into it too much today, but I just wanted to talk about that email, and I think that'd be a great idea if we were looking into that every year or two, as opposed to every 10, 20 years, and then we come up with this $2.5 million, 200,000, 400,000 a year asks that we're looking for now. I think if we were doing that every year or two in smaller increments, it'd probably be an easier ask in the future. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I did receive this email from Mayor Daines, and I thought it was a good idea also to maybe do it in smaller chunks more often. So that's all I really have today.
Any other questions? Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Brent? You're here with your official hat, not your tenant hat.
Thanks for having me. I know most of you. I do not know, is it Jeannie?
Simmons.
Okay. I know a lot of you guys too, but I'm the assessor. And John and I have a great relationship for a long time. But he asked me to come down and just talk about our appraisal process and of the hangars. I'm sure you guys maybe have got some feedback. So as with all properties, and it's no different with the hangars at the airport, we are on a cycle to reappraise every property in the county. By state code, we have to visit and do a full appraisal on every property every 5 years. And so staff, I'd love to have a bigger staff in a way, but that would take more resources, but we end up doing it once every 5 years. So the last time that the hangars were reappraised was in February of 2018 for the 2018 tax year. And so it was time this year, in the spring of this year, to reappraise them again for the 2023 tax year. And so we did that. Historically, I've done that, but as the assessor, I didn't have time. So I tasked our staff to do that, and I assigned one of our appraisers to do that. And Granted, he is not totally knowledgeable about the hangars, but he got up to speed really fast, and I gave him some insights. There's some unique things, and what we were seeing with the sales, it's been, I would say, crazy. Maybe not as crazy as the housing market, but still crazy. And so, as you can imagine, costs to construct are way higher. Everything from materials to labor, everything is more money, and so that's resulted in higher prices. And so, just to give you kind of a report and then give you some time to ask questions, some of roughly the hangars went up roughly 57%, which sounds like a big number, probably less than the housing in this county over that same 5-year period. So, but we're doing this based on, you know, cost and the sales that we do have. There's probably more sales the last few years than we've ever had, but there's not very many. There's not a lot of sales that happen. So we've considered those sales and applied it. Just like housing, we feel like, from what the data was showing, it's kind of like a house. A house now costs $300,000 for 4 walls if you want a detached home. There's exceptions to that, but hangars are a similar thing. It's going to cost you roughly $40,000 is what we estimate to get into a hangar. Even some of those old hangars in the old parts. And like I say, there may be some exceptions, but then they range way on up to a much higher. But the average was 57%. Some of those old ones went up more as a percent. Some of the ones on the front line went up more as a percent. But that's kind of where the numbers fell out. It's interesting to note, John asked earlier this morning if I could give a report on what it means for tax into the airport. I'm not the treasurer, so I don't have that number. I can work with the treasurers to get that number. I'm just the assessor. My job is to get the values correct. But I did do a little analysis, and it appears that the taxes will be roughly similar to what they were in 2018, 2019. So because the values of the homes have gone up so much over the last few years, the rate has come down. And so the values stayed roughly the same as the rate came down. Most of the hangar owners probably noticed that their taxes went down over the last 5 years. So this increase will be an increase in their taxes, but roughly no higher on average than it was back in 2018, if that makes sense. So there's roughly 75 hangars. Does that sound right, John? 75 taxable hangars. But I just want to leave you a few minutes to ask me any questions, any specific questions.
Have there been tax increases since 2018?
Tax increases.
There have been,
You
there have
mean
been school.
valuation increases?
No, just rate increases.
Well, and I'm not the expert to speak on this, but budgets have gone up. Certainly budgets have gone up, but the average rate has actually come down. So I don't know how to best to explain that.
Well, I understand that, but I do know that the school district has increased property taxes, and you all have increased property taxes. Logan City has not, but
Yeah, there have been rate changes, and even though you physically go out every 5 years, you still look at the numbers, and people may get a valuation adjustment every year potentially.
True, and I want to speak to that actually, and maybe we can get back to your question, but we have a new software program that's going to allow us to adjust these every year without having an appraiser go out there and specifically look at it. So they will be floating as we see changes in the market. So the good news for hangar owners is they won't get that big bump every 5 years. Hopefully that is more stabilized. Now, if there's an increase or a decrease in the market, they'll see that reflected from year to year rather than every 5 years. I don't know if that helps with your.
well, no, you just said the rate went down, but that assumes that the tax rate didn't change at all overall since 2018.
It's gone down considerably. the tax rate has gone down. The values have gone way up, and the truth in taxation law that was passed years ago requires the cities to hold a hearing if they want to change the
Rate.
rate. Right, you're aware of
And
that.
it's been happening,
Uh-huh.
so the rate is still going, the valuation rate is still,
As the values have gone up, the rate has gone down relative.
even with tax increases.
Yes.
Okay.
You getting many protests?
Not very many. Not very many. A couple.
I'll see you this afternoon.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I'm not totally surprised just because the taxes are no higher generally than they were a few years ago. So they still have till next Friday to appeal. September 15th is the deadline to appeal. And we'd welcome any data. We'd welcome any feedback. We're trying to get these values right. We don't want to be too high. We are not a tax collector. I am not interested in some of you all's other job of setting budgets and that sort of thing. I'm just the assessor trying to get the values right.
Part of our discussion, there's a misconception that taxes come first and budgets follow. When in fact, what happens is the government entities set their budget, then look at your number to find out what this valuation is, and then establish their tax rate in order to meet that budget. Is that accurate?
The way I explain this, if you have a two-house community, I wish we had a two-house community, and you had $1,000 budget to run this community, and you had one house that was worth $1 million and one that was worth $500,000, then one of those, the one with $1 million house would pay $666, and the guy with the $500,000 would pay the $333. Now, as you expand that bigger, that changes. But if the budget increases to $1,500, the rate comes down. Or I'm sorry, the rate goes up. The rate goes up, and with that same. Does that make sense? So, it just depends on the budget process, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can't appeal to you to lower our taxes.
No. If you're going to lower the taxes, you're going to have to talk to
Go to the public hearing.
public hearings. Yep. And I tell everybody to go and make your voices heard. Whether you're listened to or not, I don't know, but voice your concerns. So my door's always open if you have any questions, and email me if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Jason mentioned the EV grant. We have a couple other grants in the works. Armstrong is with us, and we appreciate their consistent support. They're going to give us an update on the other grants that we have in process.
Fortunately, not sure. Matter if you want to come up really quick. I am Judd Hill with Armstrong and want to introduce Connor Butterfield. I'll give him 30 seconds to tell you about himself.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ogden, Utah, and ended up getting a degree in civil engineering from the University of Utah. Go Utes. Just kidding. Just kidding. But no, so I worked in civil. I did heavy civil construction and water, and then all the while got interested in flying airplanes. Became a CFI and have tried to blend being an engineer and a pilot in the same career. And ended up having lunch with Judd one day a couple months ago, and here I am. So looking forward to working with all the airports in Utah.
Found a way.
Yes.
Found a way. We're very happy to have him. So as you recall, Armstrong joined Lochner the end of last year, and Lochner already had a very strong presence in Salt Lake with roads, rails, bridges, engineering, but we now have aviation. so Connor's actually based out of our Salt Lake office. So it just puts a very, very good resource right down the road. So really, it's been great working with them so far, and
You
looking
need to
forward
get
to
him a team shirt.
Yes, they got ordered. That's how new he is. So that is exactly, he did get the new bag this week, but yeah, it hasn't, that's very forthcoming for sure. And I guess there's technical difficulties, so I can talk versus show. First thing, when it comes to grants, there's the capital improvement project list, which is the ongoing short-term and long-term development plans for the airport. I know the last meeting, it had been discussed for those working on that general project, perhaps bringing in Mr. Snow as another representative along with John and Jason to go through that plan. That's going to be kicking off usually is end of September, beginning of October is when that process happens. The state of Utah is switching to a program called Black Cat. So it will bring everything online. The FAA has been working with other states with it. It's been very successful. It's just kind of a singular clearinghouse for tracking the projects. And that will be coming on this year. When it comes to specific projects, we have the sign project, and that grant's already been issued, but we'll come back to that one. As Jason had talked about, the EV grant, it will officially be awarded today or tomorrow, according to a conversation I had last night with the FAA. That will require some fast action. The FAA is dropping grants like crazy right now, and that is because their fiscal year ends in 21 days. So all the grants that they said would come out in May or June are coming out this week. And to that end, when that grant does get sent out for electronic signatures and going through the whole route, it has to be signed and completed by next Thursday. So normally you have a month or two to get, you want to get them done as quick as possible. On this one, there is a hard deadline of next Thursday for that grant, and that's the $183,000 and change for that grant, with a 4.685% match of local and state. As far as upcoming project funding so this year, it's the signage and the zero emission grant. We have the ongoing airport layout plan project. I'll come back to that. Next year, state funded pavement preservation. So that's going to be paints and markings. And taxiway Charlie, the end of it, or the back half of it, is in poor condition. And that would be for a state-only funded project. Then 26 is showing snow removal equipment acquisition. And then 27, taxiway India. That was also in 26. And then again, in 27, more money allocated for snow removal equipment and storage locations.
Are these grants?
These would be a combination of federal and state grants. For 26 with snow equipment or snow removal equipment, total of $200K funding. And then with a building for storage of that equipment, a total of $650 in 27. Now, that is where the plan is at today. The finalization of that and kind of locking things out or locking things in will be during the CIP process. So if it's a reshuffle or reprioritization, because obviously that's the list that was defined a year ago. Then you've gone through a winter and this year. So coming up on this year's, there could potentially be reshuffling to meet the priorities of the airport.
And by what time would we need to make that decision?
That will be coming up. They have not yet announced when they're going to hold those meetings for CIP. They just on Friday rolled out the Black Cat. It's so new that we don't even have, myself or Jason or John, no airports, no consultants have logins yet even for the system. So ideally, it will be this month, and hopefully next month there would be a better idea. And it's one where we will definitely have conversations separate from them. We can have this month to kind of work through, and that way we're already going in with a solid plan. There's plenty of room for informal meetings with FAA and UDOT before a formal meeting with FAA and UDOT.
If Jason has his meetings with the County Public Works Department and based on that wants to shift some of the snow equipment costs to earlier years, how long will it take until we feel confident that that would be doable?
Depending on the agreement, any federal funding cannot go to equipment that is used off airport
Correct.
or is owned by any other entity other than the airport.
Correct.
So this funding wouldn't be available for shared equipment.
Very correct. And as far as the timing, for getting it finalized, it would be probably in the potentially later this month, definitely by the end of October. When it comes to actually getting funding, putting in a grant application October 1st, the first day of the new year, I would be ecstatic to see a grant in May. This year it was, grants will be coming in March, April, May, and they showed up in July, August, and September. So
Okay, thanks.
it's definitely one where it would not, without spending 100% of the cost locally, it would not be realistic to expect federal funding for this winter.
Part of the challenge there, and this applies to state and as well as the federal, is they don't have, FAA does not have a budget yet for next year. They cannot approve any grants until Congress gives them their budget for the year. And all of this is just betting on what's going to come,
Exactly.
because they won't know until April how much money Denver has. That's why there are no grants issued before next April. And that's why on the last month of their year, September, they issue 50% of their grants. Because if they don't use it by the end of September, they lose it.
Right.
And so, again, to review, our challenge is that we operate in 3 different fiscal years.
Yes.
The airport, the county, and the city operate on a calendar year. The state operates July 1 to June 30th, and the feds operate from October 1 to September 30th. And so everything we have to do has to juggle within those 3 different fiscal years.
Exactly. Yeah, we are already 3 months into the state 24. So yeah, it's definitely, it's an ongoing process, but I would recommend that we, during this month, have an informal meeting of whoever is going to be working on that list to say, here's where it was last year, or for the last 5 years, here's the different plans. What do we want going forward? And with the federal, it's actually more difficult this year because they're actually trying to significantly increase funding for airports. 3.35 billion was the national average, or the national budget, and of that, 20% went to general aviation airports, which led to the $150,000 of entitlements. This year, what got passed through House Transportation Committee and has gone on to full House, it has not gotten through Senate yet, takes that annual budget to $4 billion with 25% going to general aviation, which would roughly bring the entitlements from 150,000 to about 220,000. Again, I will believe it when they pass, when the president signs a bill, but with that would bring up entitlements to roughly 220, which roughly offsets inflation rise since the last time they adjusted entitlements. So, but that would also result in the match going up, the corresponding 5% match or 4.685% match also having to go up, because instead of matching 5% of 150, you're matching 5% of 220. So, any questions on the CIP in that long term? Okay. Said for have airport master plan and the signage and the paint. Do you have a preference on which one to discuss? We'll start with the paint then. That's, as Jason said, dealing with paint, working with the state. So the end of last month had correspondence with UDOT trying to get a particular specific project to redo the paint for the airport. And it's 6 figures worth of work to do a full repaint, remarking of the airport. So it's just, what I'm looking at here is an email that from UDOT just discussing that they will try to be working this in to get funding. Now there's local maintenance things that can be done. I mean, as simple as if it's a small area, go out with a roller. If it's large area, possibly looking at city or county resources that have those large paint trucks, equipment, whatnot. But UDOT is aware of the situation and is willing to try to come up with solutions through funding at the state level. That will come up during the CIP discussion for trying to figure out getting that particular money.
They already have to repaint the runway we just barely resurfaced?
The average is 5 years is you do the pavement preservation and maintenance. We're 3 years in now. So, but the last winter got a lot of scraping done.
Okay.
The next update is the airport master plan. So I know this is kind of hard to see. You all have seen this diagram before showing the general steps. And the last item that the technical advisory committee got was a review and then the submittal to the FAA of working paper 1 going through the forecast. And that unfortunately was submitted in April, and it usually is a 45 to 60 day turnaround. Finally got the FAA's comments back a week ago on Monday. And with it, they have several comments. The next chapter after that is the facility requirements, which is based off of the forecast. Now, with your airport master plan, what really drives it is how many operations or planes taking off and landing from the airport. Unfortunately, they were underrepresented to the tune of what the FAA had officially in their records was 40,000 operations a year. Worked a lot with Aaron at USU, who has really good tracking, like to the tail number and number of exact operations. You weren't at 40,000, you were at 135,000. And then the FAA looks at certain growth rates for this 20-year forecast of the master plan. So we're already, anything over a 10% rise has to go to headquarters. Well, we started at a 300% starting value, and then going up over the 20 years up to 225,000 operations, based using the formulas of the FAA. With that, it just shows how busy you actually are. Operationally, your top 3 airports in the state, including Salt Lake. So you're very busy. But that level of forecast was a driver for why it took so long for them to get some comments back. We also had put in some stuff regarding commercial aviation forecast, but that they just needed to come out. It still is in. We've already written the facility requirements because we were tired of waiting, but we have to take some of that out. We're protect for the possibilities of commercial service in the future, but we can't include it as operational forecast. But the best case scenario of the full acceptance of the forecast and operations is your crosswind runway. Right now, the winds correspond really well with your large runway, to the tune of 98% of the time. It's right down the line, and if it's 95% or less, you're qualified for a second runway. Well, unless you get operational counts. The forecast that they are good with, minus a couple small tweaks, it makes a second runway eligible. So before, for the last 15 years, you've been required to deal either only locally or with local and UDOT for funding to protect your crosswind runway. If that continues to get approved or everything is finalized and checked off, all of a sudden your crosswind runway and corresponding taxiway Charlie would actually become eligible for federal assistance, which, you know, it is another thing that has to be maintained, which is already being maintained, but all of a sudden it makes it eligible for 90% federal funding. And that translates to 5% local versus right now it's working with UDOT to try to get funding, and then it's a 90-10 split. So hopefully this will completely pan out when we're done with it. But that is the reason why that has kind of dragged on something 3 times longer than what we had our fingers crossed for how fast they get it back to us. But we'll be working through that, and sometime this month, the full working paper 2 will be sent out for the TAC to review. The last one, so any questions on master plan?
So they did accept the operation to counts that Aaron.
She is good with, I'm actually going to be, what I've been working on earlier this week was kind of compiling the raw data that I got from USU and putting it into a nicer table and being able to reference that. But they are okay with that. The only thing they were not okay with was putting in enplanement and flights, assuming that you got commercial service starting in, I can't remember, it was either 5 or 10 years, I can't remember, and then growing out of that. So having commercial service here in 10 years is a possibility. Those numbers were not included in the high operations to get to the threshold for a second. It was kind of a standalone analysis, but they just said because there's not a letter of intent and there's not the facilities developed yet, that they just couldn't accept that level.
So that impacts runway Charlie. Does it impact other elements of the airport because of that heavy utilization?
The layout's pretty good. I would anticipate, right now in Fort Collins, Colorado, there is a test of a remote control tower. So instead of having a person standing in a tower looking out over the airfield, like a Class Delta or something like that, it is a big pole with a whole lot of cameras and a lot of technology. I could foresee that type of system possibly coming in here during the planning period of this over the next 20 years. That could potentially be a possibility. I don't see it in the near term, but given that operational count, considering there's airports that have 80,000 operations a year and have full-time man control towers, if you're at 135, it's realistic to assume that they could see the value of having a controller. But I would not expect that in the short term at all. Last project is the sign project. So for directional signage, with that, and fortunately, I guess, like I said, we don't have it, but kind of hold this up. This is your sign and marking plan. So every sign, directional sign that's on the airport. And all of the ones that were associated with the runway, we were able to put those with the runway project several years ago and get new Luma Curve signs. They're a particular manufacturer, and they have a nice curved front. They look good. So the ones that go along the long parallel runway, those were updated. Your other signs were not, and they were brought out in the last year's inspection. And so they needed to be replaced, and you received a grant for that. That's been executed. The catch, though, is that when you're doing a federally funded project, you don't get to pick exactly what you want. So the FAA has certain design specs that have to be met. Talking with Campbell guys earlier, there's different manufacturers of weather stations. And you have to, if you get a grant, a federal grant for federal tax dollars to go, you can't pick, do you want this weather system or this weather system? You hire the electrician and then they can get whatever system they want as long as it meets certain specifications. And the same goes with taxiway signs. There is a specific specification that has to be met, and that is what you got a grant for. The unfortunate part is there are different manufacturers for signs. LumaCurve is the one, they were the lowest cost signs when the runway project was done, and so that's the new signs out there. Airport Lighting Company also makes signs that meet the FAA specifications, and they were the low cost this year. So when the contractor came to us, they came with the Airport Lighting Company, not the LumaCurve company. From a pilot's perspective, they will look pretty much the same. Walk up on it, you can probably tell the difference between two different makes and models of a sign, but they will be curved signs, the same size, all of that, just different manufacturers. And we were asked, so we did some investigation, what would it cost to be able to get exactly matching signs? So the LumaCurve, so like I said, the contractor meets the grant and design standards with the airport lighting quote, and that's for the base, just for these particular signs, it was 36,000 and change. The LumaCurve was just under 50K. And if they cancel the airport lighting group, it's a $10,000 restocking fee. So the total cost, if you so desire to have exactly matching signs by brand and design versus similar signs that are different brands, which means different regulators, different cost, or you would need, if you wanted to have a spare part for this widget, you would now need two different types of that widget for maintenance to have on hand. But the cost, if you chose to go just LumaCurve, is $23,426.70. Of that, none of it is FAA or UDOT eligible. So the contractor is willing to change things up, spoke with the FAA yesterday on it. They would support, but they said to make very clear that 100% of that cost has to be locally borne. If this different sign needs an extra 2 feet of conduit for each sign, that's going to have to be fully locally funded. They will only go with paying the quoted price because the quoted price meets full FAA design specs.
So who wants the other ones? I'm like.
Well, I don't know, you're emotionally tied.
They will, I'm indifferent. I've worked with,
Then where did
It
it
is merely a maintenance issue. We have dealt for 25 years with having 3 different manufacturers and having to maintain spare parts for all 3 products. The way it sits now, we would reduce that number by 1, and we would have to maintain spare parts for 2. It was merely a convenience to us. The initial indication or understanding was that it would be a $10,000 change, which seemed palatable to avoid the inventory hassle. but for it to go up 2.5 times,
Plus, maybe.
it probably, for me, doesn't justify the additional expense.
Okay.
But we appreciate, unless there's strong feelings otherwise.
Well, that's why I asked the
We appreciate you
question.
pursuing that for us.
I have never taxied directly by those two different signs back to back, but I've taxied by both, and it's like, there's a directional sign. It's got a curve or it's flat faced. I can tell that when I taxi by, but
You can't see the data plate. from
I cannot see the data plate, and I don't know exactly how different, but even these individual signs will still be 500, 1,000, 2,000 feet apart from one another. So it's not like they're sitting right next to each other being, but it was worth looking into.
I agree, I agree.
So that's all of those projects. And
Any questions
Any
for
questions?
Armstrong?
Great.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
I was approached some time ago by the people from Campbell Scientific and their aviation department expressing their support for the airport. And I thought it'd be appropriate to invite them to come tell their story a little bit. So if you'd like to come forward and quickly introduce yourselves and,
I'll just drive
okay,
for a minute.
Well,
go ahead and introduce yourself.
sure. Thank you for having us. I'm Rob Campbell. I'm the CEO of Campbell Scientific, and appreciate the opportunity to share with you all a little bit about Campbell Scientific. When we're talking about infrastructure, I just have to say, you know, the infrastructure of the airport, we picked up, and we'll talk a little bit about this, our own Pilatus PC-12 here just a couple of years ago. My first flight back into the airport, I think it was in the November, December timeframe. We happened to be coming back in during a snowstorm, and I was so thankful for the runway lights and for the signage when you're coming into a snowstorm, and we were able to land, thankful, because we had the visibility. But it's all these little things, all these little details that you're talking about that you take for granted until your first experience landing in some adverse conditions like that. A little bit about Campbell Scientific. So I'm going to try to sum up what dates back to almost 50 years ago here in just a couple of minutes. So when you think about Campbell Scientific is often what I like to say is the technology that people don't really think about. So when you look at your Apple Watch and you go, what's the temperature outside? You never think about, I wonder where that sensor is located, or I wonder, you know, what's the means for getting the temperature or the wind speed or the wind direction, those kinds of things. That's the kind of stuff that we're doing at Campbell Scientific. So what we're most well known for is the data logger, and the data logger